How's it going, guys? Today in this video, I'm going to be going over a little bit of how the Hag Graef hard specialization disciple of Cain works. Um, the primary reason that I'm making this particular video is for my testers, because the mechanic is a little bit different than what they are used to, and people are having a little bit of a time trying to understand how this works. For those of you that are on the test server or pay attention to our patch notes, you'll know that our first testing with this class made it was a little off, and we have done some adjustments to it since then to make it feel better. But the overall mechanic of the class is still the same. This video is specifically to address this problem. I won't be making one of these for each one of the classes at this time of the project. So for those of you that know, the Hag Graef uses the animosity mechanic. It has basically, as you use melee abilities, your animosity mechanic goes down, and your abilities do different things at different values of animosity. You constantly gain a small amount of animosity over time. So, for example, the Soul Infusion ability, whenever you're between 0 and 20 animosity, your effect is 16 seconds long, 2021 is 20, and so on and so forth. Every single animosity skill has an animosity empower breakpoint, so the value that it is the best, and these are different for each ability. So, for example, Cleave Soul is stronger between 61 and 80, whereas Soul Infusion is stronger between 21 and 40, and Restore Essence is 21 and 40, Patch Wounds is 41 to 60. That is shared actually between every single hard specialization of the Hag Graef. But for the Disciple of Cain itself, there's a couple ways to do what you wanting to do, which you are a healer. You are a melee healer. Now in Interbellum, our melee healers do not require to be in melee combat at all points in time, but they do need to be in melee combat, and they have shorter range. So, for example, when you're sitting at 100 animosity, right, you Restore Essence costs 150 AP. That means you won't really be using it outside of some extraordinarily dire circumstances, which means you want to lower your animosity. How do you lower your animosity as a Disciple of Cain, Hag Graef? You use Cleave Soul or Patch Wounds. And so Patch Wounds is your more defensive version of it, right? Where you can dispel effects from targets from 75 range. And you lose 4 animosity per effect that is removed. You can stay at mid-range as a Disciple of Cain as long as you're playing against people who constantly apply ailments. And if you run a tactic, cripples. But notice that it only lets you reduce animosity when you remove effects. So even if you ran this tactic, where you can also dispel cripples, and you're dispelling 1 ailment and 1 cripple, you're only losing 8 animosity per effect. The other way that you remove, and that is your healing/defensive way of removing animosity as a Hag Graef, or as a Disciple of Cain Hag Graef. The offensive way is Cleave Soul. And Cleave Soul, obviously, of course, does damage and lowers animosity. You'll notice that it lowered animosity more than the tooltip. That's because here in our passives, we've got the passive Tempered in Blood, which causes Cleave Soul to reduce an additional 8 animosity, which means that you can drop animosity by 18 every single time you use Cleave Soul, versus the 4 to 8 that you could possibly get from Patch Wounds, unless you also dispelled 2 additional effects from 2 additional allies while in between 41 and 60. But that's also while you're already closer to the breakpoint that you want to be at. So this is your healing defensive option that is somewhat niche. This is your option that is always available. It is somewhat offensive and also requires you to be in melee combat, and that is partially why this is a melee healer. Other components that make this thing a melee healer is your standard AoE heal is point blank AoE. So people have to be somewhat close to you in order for that to happen. Also, your healing spells of Patch Wounds, Restore Essence, and then your Cleave Soul trigger Indemnity. This word right here that I can't say. And this is basically a point-blank AoE heal that goes off constantly. So, like, if I open my combat tab here, you'll see when I used Cleave Soul, I also got healed for 135. Now, you are a melee healer, but, like, your healing is still scaled off of your restoration power. So, Indemnity is, obviously, it's restoration power. It is not damage. So you're not a life tap healer. Disciples of Cain do not have life taps at all, but they do heal while they're doing some damage. And you can choose to increase the support damage you do by having more offensive stats at the extent of not having defensive ones. A couple other things for Hag Graef related to their mechanic is sometimes you have abilities that cost no AP and instead generate animosity. And the reason why that is the case for Hag Graef specifically is because all of your more powerful restoration abilities require you to have lower animosity values. So by increasing your animosity, you're actually reducing the amount of burst healing that you can do in the moment, requiring you to reduce it more by Patch Wounds or Cleave Soul. And those effects that do that are Soul Infusion, which is a hot, Covenant of Vitality, which is a buff that you put on somebody where whenever they attack, they gain heals, so you can basically view it like another hot. And Covenant of Punishment, which is similar to Covenant of Vitality, but instead of healing, deals damage. Unlike Age of Reckoning's version of Covenants, Hag Graef Covenants are single target, but you can apply all of them. So you can stack them on people. Obviously, there is a tactic, which I'm currently running, that where your covenants apply to your entire group whenever you cast it, but their duration is reduced. So they're not R effects, they are simply just enchantments that you are placing on your targets. The other components that do this is you've got Restored Motivation, which is your AoE heal, requires you to be below 61 animosity, but it doesn't cost any AP. It generates 40 animosity, so it pushes you out of that break point. You can't use it as often. You can't follow it up with Restorative Essences. And then, because you're a melee healer, you do gain access to another defensive cooldown, because you need to be able to survive cleave damage in melee without a guard. But you should still be able to be killed by focused damage. But, so you get additional defensive abilities. So this one allows you to get 60% dodge for a couple seconds. That's off the GCD, but generates that 40 animosity, and you do have to be below 61 animosity. And that is just another way of surviving. You survive, but now it's harder for you to be able to heal. Now, we understand that that means that this class, when you first look at it, it's like when you first enter combat, it's kind of hard to heal. And it is hard to heal, but it's not hard to be a healer, because what I haven't gone over so far, and what almost every single tester has seemed to miss constantly, is Soul Ward. So Soul Ward is an absorb ability that has an animosity breakpoint on the higher end. So if you are in higher values of animosity and you want to prevent damage that someone is taking, you throw on a Soul Ward for them. With the hopes that your, Soul Infusions and Covenant of Vitality and maybe Indemnity procs will keep them up while also spamming those Soul Wards, at least for the short term, until you can lower your animosity again. Overall, that is the way of the standard way of playing this class. As some people have found out in testing, there's a couple other things that you can do that don't involve trying to stay at low animosity. For example, Soul Infusion, if you actually stacks. So if you use Soul Infusion whenever you are in different breakpoints, it will stack the different duration effects. So, oh wait, sorry, I've got Soulful Blessing on, so not yet. It only does that when you're not running this tactic. So I have to turn off the tactic before I showcase that to you, because I built this as a more standard Hag Graef. So get my animosity low. Alright, so at 0 to 20, this is 16 seconds. At 22 to 40, it's 20 seconds. Notice that they stack. And then they go all the way up to the 8-second duration. So one of the ways that you can play Hag Graef is, or a Disciple of Cain that is not trying to stay at low animosity for Restore Essence procs, is to basically stack soul infusions on people in between your, like, basically drop down to 0, put a whole bunch of soul infusions, drop back to 0, rinse and repeat. You can also do the same thing with applying multiple covenants to be a more like hot / like enchantment support, while also potentially doing damage, right? So for example, because you'll be doing Please Soul. Now, you might have noticed, because I forgot to mention this, you might have noticed that whenever you reach certain points in your animosity, the abilities turn green. If the ability has this green outlaid on it right now, that means that it's currently in its Empower breakpoint. So notice Soul Ward is 61 to 80, it's 125% effective during this time, and same with Please Soul. And that is so that you can very quickly, at a glance, tell where your most powerful abilities are, even if you might not necessarily want to use it at the time. As I stated in Discord, the animosity mechanic, while when you first look at it, looks like it might be a little punishing, because you've got like the 60% effective and this 80% effective on Cleave Soul, right? But it's designed as a curve, so like there's the breakpoint where it's basically more effective, and it's equivalent to like the empowerments of other classes. And then one breakpoint away is a normal ability. You're only punished whenever you're using an ability that is 2 breakpoints away from its animosity. And that punishment isn't that, oh, you still have to use this ability, so therefore you're just being punished for being out of that breakpoint. It's designed to make you have to use a different ability that has a different purpose. So remember how earlier I said if you're at high animosity, you have to use absorbs rather than restore essence because you're at high animosity? You don't have to. You could use restore essence at 61 to 80 and pay 120, 115 action points to use restore essence, or you could, for 60 action points, use soul ward and gain a absorb on the target. That would probably be a little bit higher than actually not probably, would be higher than Restore Essence's healing value. But of course, it doesn't heal, it only absorbs damage, so you gotta print it. And it works that way across every hard specialization, but of course those aren't on the server for you to check right now. So it might feel punishing at first, and it kind of is, but nowhere near as like, oh no, I do 40% less damage with Cleave Soul between 0 and 20, because for example, at 0 and 20 in Executioner, you would use Execute, which has 125% effectiveness there. So as long as you actually move which ability you're hitting based on that, it's not as punishing as it seems. But it does still allow some flexibility in how you play, and also in how to counter you. So if you, as an opponent, see a Hag Graef that is using high animosity abilities, you know that your dispel functions are significantly more valuable, because you could dispel Soul Ward, Covenant of Blessing, or Covenant of Punishment, Covenant of Vitality, and Soul Infusion. If you know that if they are actively healing people with like Restore Essence, then you know not to use those dispels and instead to kind of push your advantage, because if they're already healing, if they're actively healing with those skills, that means you've already kind of pushed them to the point that they need to do that, so you just push harder and stop using your dispels, which do a lot less damage than your actual damage abilities. But yeah, so this was a general overview of how Hag Graef works. I'm not going to go through all the tactics and passes and stuff like that. You can read them on the builder. You can read them on the when you get in game. Like I said, the hope of this is to get testers to understand the class a little better, so that when they play it, they can provide feedback with an understanding of how the class works, rather than having to ask questions about a whole bunch of things. Hope to see you guys in the next video.